Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, 25 years serial tech entrepreneur. My next book, Fail Hard, Win Big, comes out this month, June 2025. It's my story of having 30 ventures with 20 failures and 10 wins. The common element in every company I've built is building custom software to improve the operational process, end user experience, create more enterprise value. I'm now the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We are a nearshore custom software development firm. And today we are joined from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Kenny Mullican. Kenny is an engineer who rose up the ranks. He's been president, COO. He's an author and now CIO of Paragon Films. Kenny, welcome.
Hi, Steve. It's good to be here.
Kenny, if you would give our listeners a few-minute overview of the journey of your career that led you to your current CIO position.
Sure. Well, I got started right out of college doing software development, writing code and working for some interesting different companies. And one of the companies that I was working for at the time in Tulsa, we were working on video conferencing software. And this was really before it had gotten mainstream at all. It was at that time, you still pretty much had to have these room systems. Banks and colleges had them, but average people didn't. And so we were working on trying to bring these.
That was before the days of Skype and Google Meet and Zoom and all those.
Exactly. We were very bleeding edge on that aspect. You still had to buy a lot of hardware to make that happen. But while I was working there, the company got bought by a company out in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this company was called Connectix, and they were known for their Mac software. They had made a package called RAM Doubler and another called Speed Doubler. And if you had a Mac at that time, pretty much everybody had this. It was a must-have software. But they had also created this little eyeball-shaped camera and it hooked up to your Mac. And then they had ported it to the PC, but they didn't really have any software for it. And so they saw that we were doing this video conferencing and said, hey, video conferencing with our little eyeball camera would be great. And so they brought us on board to develop this software. And then after a couple of years of being there, they decided that they were a software company and they really didn't want to be a hardware company. So they sold that division off to Logitech. And you still have the product called Logitech QuickCam today. And for a number of years, it still had that little round eyeball shape. But now they're more, different form factors that sit on your monitor or things like that. But so I was at Logitech for the next 6 or 7 years. And during that time, I had moved back to Oklahoma. And that was kind of a real pivotal thing because I was still working for Bay Area companies, but I had Oklahoma housing and affordability.
And does Tulsa, Oklahoma have much of a tech scene there?
No, not really. It's a burgeoning tech scene right now, but at that time, no. I mean, other than there was a lot of communications companies that were based here. At different times, MCI, Sprint, AT&T have had things here, and then a lot of oil and gas. So ConocoPhillips used to be based near here. And so a lot of people got their start in healthcare, oil and gas, banking, and communications, but not a whole lot of cutting edge software development or hardware technology being done. So it was pretty cool to get to come back to Oklahoma, but still work the Bay Area for a number of years. After that wound up, then at that point, I started doing different positions in Tulsa, and they all ended up leading into leadership roles. So even if I was still doing software development, I was either leading a team or managing a team, or at one point I was a part owner of a Microsoft Gold partner company. But that's kind of what got me into technology leadership, which kind of unfortunately moved me in some ways away from my love, which was the software development. Because when you're managing teams and managing people and doing the strategy for a company, more and more of that gets into the business side. Leading up to my current role as CIO of Paragon Films, which I've been here about 12 and a half years.
In CIO, CTO terms, that's like dog years. That's a long time.
I know it really is. Every time I think about, what am I doing here and why have I been here so long? It's because the company has been growing and there has been constant new opportunities to do something new and learn something new. And so even though CIOs typically don't get their hands dirty and get involved in the software development side of things, because that's what my foundation is, and that's what I really am, is I like to build stuff. I like to solve problems. I like to create things using cutting edge technology. Well, when you're the CIO, you can kind of decide what you're going to do yourself. So as long as I'm meeting the needs of the company and helping us go where we need to go, I also spend the time to stay on top of the technologies that I think are most important. So not only am I helping introduce those technologies to the company, but I understand them. I know how they work. I get into the guts of it and can work with it. And so, that has made it a much more interesting job for me than just being a business leader of technology, where you are primarily focused on the high level decisions of the company, or the budget, or the hiring and firing, or those kind of things, but really staying intimately involved with what technology is available and how we're going to take advantage of it.
Kenny, I'll tell you, some of the smartest and most successful tech leaders, CIOs, CTOs I've met, they like to still keep their hand on the pulse with, current technology, some hands on keyboards, even if that means that's nights and weekends on side projects, just to make sure they are not losing touch with the rapid rate of change of what's going on out there, which especially the past 2.5 years as generative AI has become mainstream. Now it's, things are changing weekly or if not daily at this point.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned AI, and I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about that, but I could go on about that for a long time. But one of the things that has been the coolest about the latest form of the generative AI has been that it is allowing me to stay with that finger on the pulse and actually involve more with the technology and software development, because it allows me to skip all the long, boring parts. Like previously, if I really wanted to develop a little application for something, I had to go, oh my gosh, what new toolkit am I going to have to learn? And what documentation am I going to have to peruse? And what am I going to have to Google in order to find some example that does this little piece of what I need? And I could spend a few weeks just getting up to speed on the building blocks that I need to make the thing. Whereas now with AI, I say, you know what? I want to do this. How do I get started? And it cheerfully says, I can help you with that. And pretty soon I'm cutting and pasting code, and I'm building, and I'm telling it, hey, it got this error. What does that mean? Oh, that means we need to do this. And sometimes something that clearly would have been weeks or a couple of months to do something, I've got a prototype up in a couple of days. And not only that, but I understand how it works. Because that's what, the AI can do, is it doesn't just say, here's an example, hope it works for you. Here's the code, here's what it does. Would you like to make it do this instead? Would you like to add more error handling? Would you like to, document it for, future generations, whatever you might want to do. So it's kind of a
It
game.
absolutely helps us all be more productive, whether it's in engineering or anything else for that matter. All of a sudden, you have a knowledgeable tool or assistant to bounce ideas back and forth that can really help accelerate things. Now, before we jump into your company, tell us, now you're a contributing author for Acceleration Economy. What are you doing there?
Well, that kind of has wrapped up now and moved into a different, form they call Cloud Wars. So I'm not so involved with that now. But for a few years, what I was doing is just taking whatever was the interesting topics that might be interesting to a CIO and then write about it as an analyst, but from the perspective of a CIO. So not just from that clear, trying to be very, journalistic and say, here's the thing that happened, but instead to say, here's a new product, and I'm wondering how we could use that in manufacturing. I think it might be great for this. Maybe I haven't actually used it, but I do a little research into who is using it and what are the possibilities and how would that apply to my company and what's my thought process and how I would go about evaluating that and determining if it's good and, what kind of personnel would I need to have to ramp up, taking advantage of that technology. And, it afforded me a chance not only to write articles, to be in some videos and panels, but also to go to a lot of conferences, have some speaking opportunities, and go meet people and see the interesting things that are going on firsthand.
Cool. All right. So for those not familiar with Paragon Films, give us the elevator pitch and what makes your company stand out in the world of plastics manufacturing.
Sure. So what I always start with is Paragon Films, we're a plastics manufacturer, not a movie company.
And when I first saw it, my assumption was movie company until I looked into it. So good distinction.
Everybody does, unless they're already connected to us in some way because of the industry. Films, they do assume that means movies. And what kind of movies you making out there in Oklahoma? Man, I keep thinking one of these days I'm going to come up with this whole elevator pitch for the other.
I figured you guys made Tulsa King, and
yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna come up with a whole a whole fake profile pretty soon for that.
There you go.
But in the meantime, what the real Paragon Films does is, if you imagine like Glad Cling Wrap, the plastic wrap on a little spool, but great big rolls of it used industrially. So we've got hand film, which is something you can actually hold in your hand and walk around a pallet stack with boxes and wrap it up. But also they have what's called machine film. So somebody will have a forklift, they'll take the pallet of boxes and they'll set it down, and then the robot will wrap it all up, whether the arms move around it or whether it has a little turntable that spins. It ends up wrapping, and the stretch film means that it stretches and then sticks to itself, and that's what holds it all together in place so that the boxes don't fall off the pallet when you're shipping them, and it gets them there in one piece.
Gotcha.
Make a couple 100 million pounds a year of the stuff.
Gotcha. So explain how the role technology plays from a plastics manufacturing perspective.
Sure. Some of the parts of it are what's common to any company. We have an ERP system. So we've got our accounting and finance in there. We've got our sales in there and customer service. But when it gets to manufacturing, you've got a lot more information that you have to deal with. And some people have their manufacturing execution systems in a separate system, and then they only track the financials in the system. But we use Dynamics 365 for finance and supply chain management. So it's all in one piece. And the manufacturing side is there. So that's going to handle production planning and demand management, forecasting. You're going to do your production schedules in there. And then we have computer systems that are on the shop floor. So in the manufacturing operation, as this product is coming off of the line, first off, they have to pull the information down on what are we supposed to make and what is the formula for making it. And they program that and put that into the system. And then as they're making the product and it comes off, they're weighing that up, making sure that it's within the weight specs that is expected. And then once they've got one pallet full, then they hit a button and that sends the journals into the ERP system. So now we've recorded that we've got this product into inventory. So then we've got the inventory being tracked, and then the shipping all has to get done through there, and kind of goes on and on until finally we're doing the invoicing. You got EDI, so you're doing electronic transmission with our trading partners. Some of our bigger customers are sending their orders to us and getting invoices through EDI. We've got to do systems for doing the routing and rating. So when you're planning to ship this product by truck, you got the truckloads that you need to plan. Where is it going to go? Who's going to get it there the most cost effectively? Sometimes you got the less than truckloads where you got these, companies that'll come and pick up, partial truck, but, get that to where it's going to need to go. So all these systems have to be managed, maintained, in some cases customized, because things in the packaging and the stretch film industry have, a few things that might not be available right out of the box that you've got to make work the way you need to. And then finally, just integrating that into everything else that we do, where we've got things that aren't part of the ERP system, but it's still got to get all the data out of there for our reporting, for our dashboards and analytics. And now with AI, we have the opportunity to start using AI to process this data. So you can imagine things like you got these manufacturing lines and you want to know if something is going on that may be an indicator that maintenance is going to be coming up. You may need to replace these parts or replace this engine, and you don't want to wait until it breaks. And now you've got to order the thing. It may take 2-3 weeks to get here and a little bit of time to install it. You could have a lot of downtime. So instead, you want to have a system that is constantly monitoring and tells you ahead of time, hey, this might be something you need to look at replacing. Now you can order that part, schedule a very short downtime, get that part replaced before it ever became a problem.
So pre-show, you mentioned that current projects, you're really focused around AI agents. So is this an example of the type of problems you're trying to solve with those?
Yeah, that's one. And that particular one was one where we actually partnered with a company that had that as a product. So they've got these hundreds of little sensors that they come in and install all over the place. And then using cellular data, it gets transmitted out. They've got an AI system in the cloud that then alerts us to what we need to do by comparing it with millions of data points they have from having connected these sensors to all kinds of operations like ours. But other ones that we're starting to look at is a similar idea, but you've got product that's being manufactured and there are other sensors that are looking at information not about the functioning of the machinery, but the production of the products. It's looking at the flow of the melted plastic as it's coming through. It's checking the heat, the pressure. There's a few different things there that could indicate several things. It could indicate, hey, you're making the wrong product. You're making the right product, but you got the wrong ingredients going in. You're making the right product with the right ingredients, but must be something wrong with the ingredients because something isn't right. And so using AI, this is something we want to be able to do to, in real time, as quickly as possible, determine that we need to make some change rather than waiting until we've produced a few hours of product that now may need to be scrapped because it's not going to be up to our quality specs. So, that's another area.
Gotcha. So our listeners are tech and software execs. Talk about your engineering team, how you have it structured, the work model you guys follow.
Yeah. So one of the things that's common about almost every place that I've worked, other than when I was at Logitech, is very lean teams. We never have the luxury of having lots and lots of people that are just assigned to be programmers or to be here's your little piece of the job. Most everywhere that I've been working in software development, it's almost every person individually is a developer, what I would call a developer. So you need to understand how to collect requirements, how to architect the system, how to develop it, how to test it, how to support the user afterwards. And so that's what we tend to have is a whole team of people that are all wearing lots of different hats. And my particular team is divided up into a few different sections. Because I'm the CIO and I'm not just over the software development, I've got my infrastructure side. And for my company, that means everything from devices, phones, PCs, servers, networking, Wi-Fi, but also cybersecurity, Office 365, email, all of that side of things. And then I've got a applications team, which both supports our ERP and any customizations there and upgrades to that, but also custom development for the things that aren't readily available as a turnkey product if we need to develop it. And that often means kind of connecting pieces, integration pieces, where we say, all right, we've got to collect this information and get it into our ERP system, or we've got to collect it and combine it with the ERP data to get it into our data model. And then we've got our business analytics. And so that's covering everything from databases, Power BI, models, and most recently getting more into the Azure side of things with Fabric, and now starting to look at, what are ways that we can make that data really available for AI systems so that we can use it for whatever AI projects may come up.
And work model, are you guys on site, hybrid, remote?
Yep. So like many people during the quarantine time, we went fully remote. And that was a great time for having to get all the systems in place to where really anybody can work remotely anytime. And we did that for quite a while, a couple of years at least. And then we went to a hybrid model where we had Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday on site, Thursday, Friday, remote. And that lasted for a couple of years. And only recently, just this few months ago, we went back to full time in the office. So everybody works Monday through Friday in the office, but with the flexibility that, if for whatever reason you're kind of under the weather, but you're not sick enough to not work, you would have come in, but you just don't want to spread it around. Fine, log in from home if you really want to work and not lose the time. Or, sometimes somebody's got, something there. The kid's school is closed today and they couldn't get anybody to watch them and they just need to work from home. We have that flexibility because we know that it's not like we don't have the systems in place.
So with the team being back to full-time in office, where are the main offices they're going? And is that Tulsa, Oklahoma? Is that?
Yeah. So our corporate headquarters is in Broken Arrow, which is a suburb of Tulsa, and that's our corporate office. We do have one of our IT people at our North Carolina facility because we also have a plant in Taylorsville, North Carolina, not too far from Charlotte. And his role, he can do anything for the infrastructure side, but he is often focused on the specific needs of that North Carolina plant. We also have a plant in Washington State, but we don't have any IT people there. We just have to go out there to support it. And we recently, just in the last couple of months, we acquired a company in Mexico down in San Luis Potosi, just a kind of up in the middle in the high desert mountains area. But I've got an IT team there. So I've got about 4 people in IT in Mexico as well. They all also report into the office there.
Gotcha. So with your engineering teams, do you do a mix of full-time employees and contractors? What's the approach you like to optimize your team with?
All full-time employees. We don't do any contractors except when we have a real specific need that we think, okay, we can get somebody in just to do this one project for us. But to be honest, it hasn't worked very well for us. The times that we did just bring a contractor in for a particular purpose, the time that it took them to get ramped up on all the other business side of things, understanding the needs and being part of the team and all that. And then for the just the cost of it, we've ended up steering away from it most of the time, unless it's a really, really big project. Like when we did our ERP implementation, obviously we had people that were not part of our company that were part of that. But no, for our team, it's all full-time employees. Which, as you mentioned, I was working for one company where the majority of the software people were contract and had been for years. It was the same as being a full-time employee, but they just got their paycheck from somebody else. And that was the way that company had liked to do it.
Gotcha. All right. So, as a CIO in today's world, 2025, what's the biggest challenge you are facing now?
One of the biggest, I would say, is this thing that seems to be emerging where you got people who are getting out of college and they've studied the right thing. Hey, I want to go into technology. That seems like a hot place to be. But nobody wants to hire them because they don't have the experience yet. And everybody wants you to have ideally, 15 years of experience, but at least, 5 years, 3 to 5 years would be kind of a starting point.
Right.
So then you've got the people who do have that much experience and, they're able to command a pretty high salary. So it's kind of then that dichotomy of, do I get somebody I can afford but has no experience, or do I get somebody that's going to be able to really hit the ground running, but's going to make more than I do in order to get them in? And that's a hard sell to a private equity owned company that, hey, the kind of salaries that experienced IT people are getting are a lot more than you may have ever had to pay before.
Gotcha. Especially being in a more rural market like Tulsa, that I could definitely see that be a shock.
Yeah. Well, and since we are fully on site and the company is not really willing to hire people who would just be remote, that means, okay, you got to find somebody who either lives in Tulsa or is willing to relocate to Tulsa. So that can definitely be a challenge.
Gotcha. All right. So Kenny, if you have a friend or a family member, or maybe one of your kids who said they want to be a CIO, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that it can be a very rewarding role, but you need to be prepared for a wide range of skills in order to go into that. That the technology side is important. And I think it's very important. I think that there are a good number of CIOs who did not come up through technology and they just managed because they know how to manage things or they know how to work with the CEO or things like that. I don't feel like that is ideal situation to not understand the technology that you're in.
Is that who you want leading your technology roadmaps? Somebody who doesn't know it? I tend to agree with you there.
Yeah. So you definitely need to have the technology side, but as a CIO, you can't be too pigeonholed into one area of technology. You need to be able to have the wide breadth, and that's going to range from cybersecurity. You got to keep the company safe from a constantly evolving, threat actors. You need to understand the basic things about things like networking and, general system architecture and cloud, and then at least something about software development. You don't have to be a hardcore software developer, but you at least have to know kind of how things are built and how the pieces work. But then aside from the technical side, you need to understand business. So I would highly recommend that any CIO get at the minimum a business minor, but something like an MBA or something like that can go a long way, because really having a good understanding of finance to be able to talk to a CEO, to be able to talk to the CFO or the board and understand how the cost of your projects and the cost of the technology is so ingrained in what you're going to get approved. You can't just make the case for it. You've also got to be able to talk the business side, which gets into sales. Technology leadership is sales as much as anything, and even though it may not be selling to customers, your customers are your other executives, the CEO, the board,
especially the other non-technical executives and board members, and that can often be the hardest sell.
Yeah. And then I think probably the final thing is just those soft skills. You can be a very successful IT person who lives in a cave, but it's a lot tougher once you start getting into management roles and the higher management roles and working with executives if you don't have that ability to speak their language and to be comfortable talking to them and comfortable getting up and doing public speaking and a lot of those kind of things. It doesn't come easily to a lot of IT people, a lot of tech people. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can geek out with the best of them, but I can turn it off and talk to people who aren't so familiar with the technology and make it easy for them to understand and to see the business value.
Great advice. So, Kenny, what's one brutal lesson you wish you would have learned earlier in your career?
Take that project estimate and times 3. It's so easy to underestimate what something's going to take. I still have to stop myself sometime when I think, "Oh, that couldn't be more than a couple of weeks." And, even my wife will say, you always need to just, even if like for a home project, whatever you think it's going to take, it's a lot more. It's just going to be more, and just plan for that. When we did our first ERP implementation, never dreamed that it could go so far over time and over budget. And looking back at it, I don't really believe that was a failure. It took what it was going to take. The failure was being able to anticipate that and knowing that that was really what was going to take, and not assume that the best case estimate is what you're going to be able to pull off. And so, definitely a big lesson learned for me is just to always think it's going to take more than you think. It's going to cost more than you think. Go ahead and get that out there early. You don't want to sell the project on an idea that in your mind is a starting point, but to the board is a not to exceed.
That's good advice. Kenny, thank you for getting uncensored with us today. Excellent insights you gave. Before we sign off, any final advice for tech leaders?
Don't be afraid of AI. It is just where things are leading. Sure, there are a lot of bad things and negative aspects about it, but you got to find ways to deal with those and find a way to make it part of your user's experience, a part of your team's experience and productivity tools, and just get on board with it. Just accept that it's there and embrace it and run with it.
And this is Software Leaders Uncensored, so I'm going to be a little more brutal about that we all have no choice. You jump on the AI bandwagon or you're going to get screwed. Agree or disagree?
Absolutely agree.
Awesome. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. Stay bold out there and keep building. Thanks, everyone.
That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.